Hey guys, Dr. Justin Marcagiani here. Today we're going to be talking about the top foods that could be hurting your thyroid gland. Again, you could have hypothyroidism, Hashimoto's, or some kind of an autoimmune inflammatory issue with your thyroid, and these foods could be at play. And I just did a video here recently on the top foods that could be helping. So make sure you see, we'll put that link down below and at the end so you can see that compendium video as well. All right, so guys, most thyroid issues, there's an autoimmune component. So when we look at recommended dietary advice or foods, we want to look at foods that could potentially exacerbate an autoimmune attack. Also, we want to look at foods that maybe are just inflammatory in nature or just very poor in nutrients. So there's going to be, of course, just common sense foods that we'll put on there, but I'll try to nuance and give you some foods that may be a little bit of a curveball for you that you weren't quite thinking about. And so if you want to dive in deeper, we'll put links down below on some of the how to get a lab test. If you want to dive in deeper and get your thyroid tested, put a link down below where you can access that worldwide, or at least in the United States, you can access that. Go to a local Quest lab and get that drawn. And there's links down below if you want to dive in and get more functional medicine support from myself, my team worldwide. We see patients all over the world. You want to dive in, there'll be a link down below where you can reach out as well. So first things first, with your thyroid, a common misconception is, we want to get more iodine, right? But sometimes iodine can be a double-edged sword when you start getting into more seafoods, not really seafoods, but more seaweeds, dull seaweed, those kind of things. They can be very high in iodine. So you have to be very careful with that. Got to be very, very careful with that out of the gates. Really important. Okay, 1 second here. Oh, sorry about that, guys. All right, so when we look at the different foods, iodine is a double-edged sword. You want to make sure that you do not go too high on your iodine at all. So if we're eating iodine, there's going to be some iodines in eggs. There's going to be some iodine in salmon or fish. There'll be some iodines in some starches, but you're only getting very small, less than 100 microgram amount of iodine. So not a big deal. When you start going into more kelp and seaweeds, you're going to start getting above that 1 milligram amount, which could potentially be problematic if you have lots of antibodies. So you really have to be careful going too high in the iodine. So if you're doing lower iodine foods, eggs, salmon, fish, some safe starches, some mushrooms, you're probably going to be okay on that. Get your antibodies looked at, your TPO, your thyroid peroxidase, or your thyroid globulin antibody, or your anti-thyroid globulin, same thing. Some tests will put it the same way, 2 different ways. So you want to look at iodine. Same time, you do want to make sure you have some, at least a couple hundred micrograms, and you're eating just a good whole food anti-inflammatory template. You'll get the smaller amount of foods like I mentioned. Next, you want to be careful of is foods high in goitrogen. Oh, the problem with that, goitrogenic foods, they block iodine uptake. So like I mentioned, you need some, but you don't want to block the total uptake. Again, foods like soy, even your raw cruciferous vegetables like broccoli, cauliflower, cabbage, Brussels sprouts, they can be high in these goitrogenic compounds that block that iodine uptake. But those foods are healthy, Dr. J, right? Those have vitamin K in there, good nutrients, good sulfur compounds for estrogen metabolism. Yes, they are. Now, here's the double-edged sword. Cook them, steam them. That's going to help decrease some of the goitrogens. By cooking and steaming, you're going to do a much better job with that. Be careful, don't juice a bunch of them. And don't eat them raw. That's where you're going to really get into trouble. And then just try to balance it out with other foods that aren't super goitrogenic. And, we can always, look at doing an iodine uptake test or some kind of an iodine absorption test too. But I like to look at someone's diet. As long as I'm seeing a small amount of goitrogenic food, just cook it, just steam it. And that's going to break some of those goitrogens down. And then just try to balance that with other foods that are less, other vegetables that are non-starchy leafy greens that are less on the goitrogenic side. So less of the cauliflower, cabbage, broccoli. And again, these are going to be your low FODMAP carbs. So a lot of my patients that have thyroid issues may have a lot of gut issues, SIBO, bloating, gas. And so we may have them on a low FODMAP diet anyway, which would actually cut some of those foods out. Like if you have motility, bloating, gas, constipation, we may actually go lower FODMAP, which does those higher goitrogenic foods out coincidentally. Gluten's going to be a big one. Gluten is associated with Hashimoto's thyroiditis. You can go on PubMed right now. Gluten and Hashimoto's, tons of studies on it. Again, plus gluten doesn't have any magic nutrients that you can't get from leafy greens or good proteins and fats. It's not like there's just this awesome nutrient there you can't get somewhere else. And so it makes sense. Replace it with another starch. Most people are eating gluten because they want a starch. Well, just choose a safe starch, whether it's a squash, sweet potato, greener banana, parsnip, rutabaga, turnips. Those are all better options. Just try to choose the lower FODMAP or even just a safe starch. Like if you're trying to just be paleo, you could even do some white potato or regular sweet potato, and you'd probably be okay. But gluten, the surface proteins on gluten it's very much similar to the surface proteins on the thyroid. And so when your body takes these proteins in, it can increase gut permeability. The studies on non-celiac gluten sensitivity still increasing gut permeability. So you can not be celiac, not having a significant gluten allergy, but that gluten protein, which is the protein in primarily wheat, supposedly barley and rye as well, but gluten is primarily wheat, that can increase that gut permeability, open those tight junctions, allow that protein, that surface protein is very similar coating as your thyroid tissue. And so when your immune system sees that, it can tag it and make antibodies for it. And then the poor old thyroid gland gets caught up in that crossfire, if you will, that molecular mimicry crossfire. And so cutting that out can reduce the inflammation. Plus, gluten has a whole bunch of Roundup residue associated with a lot of genetically modification, which can increase gut permeability and increase inflammation. In general, any kind of processed food like flour, processed sugar, it's typically going to be loaded with gluten, lots of sugar. When you have a healthy thyroid gland, you want good blood sugar because thyroid controls metabolism. When you're taking your blood sugar and making it go up and down like a roller coaster ride, that's going to put stress on your thyroid and your adrenals because your body is pumping out insulin to bring that blood sugar back up, back down. So the blood sugar's up, right? Your body's pumping out insulin to take that blood sugar that's up and bring it down. Then as it goes up fast, it goes down just as fast. What goes up goes down just as fast. When it crashes, that's where we're making a bunch of cortisol to bring it up, and your hormones and your thyroid system is responding as a result of it, and that puts stress on your metabolism. We want good fuel, we want good stable blood sugar, and then our metabolism does not have to worry about it because insulin can impact thyroid conversion. And so when we're surging insulin, that can impact T4 to T3 conversion. Our active, or say our inactive thyroid, T4 is more inactive. It still has activity, but it's more inactive than T3. T4 gets converted to T3, and that's about 3 times more metabolically active. So we have TSH, that's our brain hormone, talks to our thyroid to make T4. T4, more inactive, gets converted to active T3. And we need good nutrients and good stable blood sugar. So if our insulin surging, that's going to impact T4 to T3 conversion. If our cortisol is surging, that's going to impact T4 to T3 conversion. Plus, if we're driving inflammation, that could impact TSH and that HPT axis, that communicational feedback loop that talks to the thyroid to make T4 and T3 anyway. And we already talked about excess iodine. We talked about how the fact that could exacerbate our TPO or our thyroglobulin, and that could also drive more hydrogen peroxide synthesis because part of iodination spits off hydrogen peroxide, which is H2O2. Selenium comes in there, and that is going to neutralize that hydrogen peroxide. It's going to pull an oxygen off it and make it H2O, make it water. And so I would say processed foods, it's missing selenium, it's missing zinc, it's missing magnesium, it's missing CoQ10. These are important nutrients that will help with that antibody attack. And so when you're eating whole nutrient-dense foods like magnesium, you're getting the foods that are going to help with the inflammation and to help with the thyroid conversion and keep the antibodies down. And so processed foods are going to be missing a lot of those important nutrients. All right, guys, if you enjoyed today's video, I'd love to see your comments down below. Again, we'll put in the resource section thyroid test there. So if you want to dive in and get some testing, there'll be a link down there. And if you need that specific functional medicine support one-on-one, there'll be a link to reach out to my team. We're happy to help worldwide. All right, guys, have an awesome day, y'all. Take care. Bye now.